Welcome to the Therapy Show podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Mustard. In each episode, I interview a seasoned and knowledgeable talk therapist from the counseling world to glean valuable insights, techniques, and tools that you can apply to your practice and your life. And if you're considering a career in the counseling field or just want to hear about what it's like to be a talk therapist, then this is the podcast for you. Well, hi there. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. This is quite a unique episode. It's like nothing I've ever done before, and I'm really excited to share this with you. So it is about an hour-long conversation that Dr. Richard Schwartz, the founder of Internal Family Systems, had with a group of mental health clinicians. And he's sharing his IFS model and taking questions from this group. Now, the group is called Mondays with Moshe, and you're going to hear from its creator, Moshe Norman, in just a few minutes. But I wanted to tell you a few things about this episode before we dive into the main content. So, no, this is a recording of a live conversation. So the audio at times isn't the best. However, I think it's clear enough that you should be able to make out what's being said and asked. Now, Dr. Schwartz's audio is great, and so is Moshe's. However, at some of the audio from the group is a little fuzzy or just not very clear. So hang in there with us. We appreciate your patience. Now, also, I want you to know this group is composed of mental health clinicians who are mostly Jewish. So you may hear some phrases or words that you aren't familiar with. However, the content shared is definitely clinical and not from a religious perspective. So if you're unsure of what something means, or you're even curious to learn more, feel free to reach out to me, send me an email, lisa@lisamustard.com. And one more thing, the information provided is solely for educational purposes and should not be a substitute for any work you are doing with your doctor or therapist. Okay, so let's jump into a brief conversation that I have with Moshe Norman, who was so gracious in letting me borrow this conversation with Dr. Richard Schwartz. But before we jump into the interview, I have a question to ask you. Are you looking for continuing education contact hours? And do you want to learn while you're on the move, on the go, making dinner, washing clothes, at the gym, on a walk? Well, if so, then I think you are going to love my pod courses. Imagine a podcast blended with a self-study course. You can listen at your convenience, anytime, anywhere. And when you're set, take a brief quiz, finish the pod course assessment, and claim your certificate of completion. If you want to learn more, head over to my website, which is lisamustard.com/pod courses to see all the pod courses that are available today. Well, hey friends, welcome back to another episode of the Therapy Show. I am super excited to have Moshe Norman join me on the podcast this week. Welcome. It's so great to have you.
Hey, Lisa, thank you for inviting me. This is really exciting. I've been hoping we could do this for a while.
Yeah, me too. And I got to tell people how I found you, how we connected. So a few weeks back, I was doing the prep work to interview Dr. Avram Weiss, and I got on YouTube and I just typed in his name, hoping maybe there would be something out there where somebody was interviewing him. And wouldn't you know it, Mondays with Moshe popped up, and I was like, what is this all about? Because you, my friend, have an incredible channel full of master trainers that you have interviewed for your, I guess you would call it collegial group or collaboration group that you've created. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about this and the process? And I have so many
Sure,
questions.
sure, absolutely. So Mondays with Moshe was born kind of by mistake. It's now a weekly Zoom call for mental health professionals, and the goal is really to teach people, mental health professionals, particularly newer ones who are just learning, and of course those who appreciate particular topics, to bring them back to the world of the therapeutic process. Lisa, there's been so much focus on technique and intervention and modality that some of the newer folks who are joining the field often, forget that there's a process of psychotherapy, and that process is very relational, is very relationship based, and it's perhaps the most important part of the therapy process. In fact, I know that the studies show that the most important variable to success in therapy is the relationship. And so, if we really go back to the old days of therapy, much of it focused on the relationship between therapist and client. And what I've done is we really began during the COVID period when there was a lot of podcasts and Zoom calls just beginning and becoming popular. And I reached out to a number of very popular or famous and renowned therapists in the world and said, hey, we have a group of mental health professionals and we'd like to learn a little bit. Can we have a conversation? And, one of the beauty of it is that contrary to a typical podcast, which is just an interview between two people, this was a live Zoom call. So the mental health professionals were able to join live and then raise their hand and ask questions. So we've had greats in the field, such as, the very famous Dr. Irv Yalom and Dick Schwartz, Richard Schwartz of IFS, Sue Johnson of EFT, and many, many other, Kathy Steele, great people in the trauma uh, arena who've agreed to come on free of charge and just have a conversation with mental health professionals where we can ask, interview, question, and sort of touch some of the great people.
Mhm.
And what's even more fascinating is the way this began. I was on a WhatsApp chat with a number of mental health professionals, and we kind of got into this debate, of content versus process, CBT versus psychodynamic. Do we focus on the relationship and what's going on, or do we focus on technique and modality and cognitive restructuring and really more hands-on, what they call, top-down change versus, or incremental change
Mhm.
versus, a deeper kind of change. And there was a great debate that we had, and we said, okay, let's have a Zoom call. We're all in quarantine anyway. Let's have a Zoom call and let's discuss it together. And that's how week one sort of happened. We had a sort of debate between CBT therapists versus psychodynamic type therapists or insight oriented therapists. And then from there we said, let's spend some more time next week giving the other side, some space to speak, because it was a heated and passionate debate. Let's calm down a little bit and let's hear what the other people have to say. And then before you knew it, it's like, let's interview somebody. And then we said, hey, if we're interviewing people anyway, why don't we go to the originators of some of these things? Why don't we go to the Becks and the Yaloms and some of the originators of these modalities, and let's talk to them. And that's how it evolved. And we're now at about 1,500 mental health participants, still growing and hoping to continue to grow.
Yes, I mean, wow, what a beautiful thing that you're adding to our field. I mean, I'm just blown away by the intentions you all had, how you all just kind of got together and decided one day just to make it happen. And it's funny as you're sharing your story. I mean, that, when I think back to like why I started the podcast, that's it. I mean, I was sitting in a conference 8 hours in a chair thinking, why couldn't I take these incredible speakers and put them in my earbuds and, go on a walk or like do make dinner and learn and just, have it be portable and take it with me. And I love that I can, get on your YouTube channel and listen and be out and about and learn. And I mean, that was really my intention too, was just to bring these voices to our field in a different modality. So maybe that's why I feel like, so connected and so excited
Connected.
about what you're doing.
Yeah. And I think it's so wonderful that some of these, greatest people in the field are willing to come on pro
Mhm.
bono just to be able to share, this is the helping profession, and just to
Yeah,
be able to share where they're not necessarily having any benefit other than
right.
that they're just sharing their passion and their sort of purpose in life, and in this field, sharing it with other mental health professionals so we can just create a better world.
Right. Yeah, I think that's incredible because if you think about it, a lot of the times to get training by them, you have to pay quite a bit of money to do that. So wow, yeah, that is such a gift that they're offering. And I'm so glad that you have put it all together. So tell us a little bit about this interview that we're gonna after this intro, jumps into the interview with Dick Schwartz. Can you tell us a little bit about what people can expect to
Mhm.
listen to and to hear?
Yeah, so Dick Schwartz, of course, is the creator of Internal Family Systems, IFS. And what struck me with Dick Schwartz more than anything else was not necessarily the details of the modality or, the very interesting language that he has in describing firefighters and this kind of language that he's created, as much as his presence.
Hmm.
And I think that what's so fascinating from the, I don't know, 120 or 150 episodes that I've done of Mondays with Moshe, the the presenters who we felt the most connected with were the ones whose presence were so powerful. And so, I want the listeners to be able to experience the content that he says, but also to feel. why are people feeling so connected with IFS and with Dick Schwartz? And that's, I don't remember if I asked him this specific question, but I probably did, because when I feel it, that's what I ask. The question that I ask some of these presenters is, what have you brought to this world that makes people so aghast or so taken, so struck with the modality? And what I feel the answer is the presence, just the presence. And I want the listeners to feel Dick Schwartz, feel his presence, and to glean, from that more than anything, how to provide psychotherapy, how to be with your patient or client.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good way of putting it because there's definitely a different feeling that I have when I listen and watch him in action. I feel very calm. I feel very at ease. I feel very taken care of, protected. And it's different, with different trainers, of course. But gosh, how do we get there? How do we
Yeah.
become
Yeah.
that type of,
How does
therapist?
expert therapists make the person with whom they're engaging feel as though they're the only person in the world? And
Yeah,
yeah, I think that that's one of the greatest compliments I've ever gotten from a client or two or three, which was, "Boy, do you actually have other clients besides me?"
right,
I can't think of a greater compliment from a client than acknowledging that they feel that the time between us is so sacred.
right, right. Definitely. Well, thank you so much for lending me this video that we're turning into an audio so we can share it with the listeners of the therapy show. And I want to encourage anyone listening to go and subscribe to your programming, and we'll put your email because that's how people subscribe is they have to email you and ask to be added to the list. So we'll put that in the show notes. And is there anything else you'd like our listeners to know about you, about your practice, about anything else that you want to share?
Well, I'm a licensed clinical social worker based out of Lakewood, New Jersey. I'm always happy for consultation questions or, supervision groups. I've done some trainings that I'm sure people will start hearing about soon in the near future, including
Mhm.
one that really focuses on the process of psychotherapy and the process of the relationship in therapy, and more to come. So just look up my name and stay tuned.
Okay, great. All right, you guys, let's just jump into this interview with Dick Schwartz.
The long story with my history is I worked on the psych unit in college that the hospital my father was connected to just as a job, which was a very psychoanalytic unit. And I was an aide, and this was an adolescent unit, and I got close to these kids, and I would be in the day room when the families would come to visit, and I would see how much they scapegoated these kids, and then I'd hear about the sessions with their psychiatrist where the families were hardly ever mentioned. And I just thought, there's got to be a better way to do this. So when I got out of school, I got interested in family therapy, which was just sort of coming onto the scene back then, and wound up getting a PhD in that.
Who are some of the family, like the popular family therapist names in those days? Was it still Minuchin?
Yeah, Salvador Minucci. I was a structural family therapist. Haley, Whitaker, all those guys. So Virginia Satir was a big influence, actually. So I did a PhD, and I was one of those obnoxious, zealous family therapists who thought we'd found the Holy Grail. And people who were mucking around in the intrapsychic world were wasting their time because we could change all that just by reorganizing these family relationships. And set out to prove that after I graduated in the doctoral program, got a group of bulimic kids together with their families to do an outcome study and found that I could reorganize the families just the way the book said to do it. And my clients didn't realize they'd been cured, and they kept binging and purging. And so out of frustration, I began asking why, and they started to teach this to me because they started talking about these different parts. And like you, I had this systems background, so rather than getting to know each part individually, I started asking questions about how they all related to each other. And I was lucky because I had a couple clients who were incredibly articulate about their inner systems. And they would talk about, yeah, there's this critic, but then the critic triggers this part that makes me feel worthless and young and empty and alone. And that part is so terrifying that to the rescue comes the binge and takes me out. but the binge brings the critic back, and now it's calling me a pig on top of the other names. And then that brings back that young, empty, worthless, alone feeling. So the binge has to come back. And it sounded like the circular sequences of interaction that I'd been studying in families and trying to intervene into.
So your patients, your clients really taught you internal family systems.
Very much, yeah.
Okay.
You know, basically I'm an empiricist, and I was fortunate in a way to not have been biased by other psychodynamic or psychoanalytic approaches. So I really had to be in that beginner's mind and really learn from my clients.
So that's the advantage of the newer clinician, that they're still open, not stuck in any kind of pattern or assumption.
Exactly.
Amazing. Okay. Well, I just want to remind all of you I know we have about 65 people on. For those of you who are on who would like to question or comment, we'd be happy to take your questions or comments, just asking you to please use the raise your hand button on the bottom right of the screen. And today, when I blasted out that you're going to be the presenter, I got such a rush of immediate excited feedback that I haven't gotten, that I'd gotten excited feedback before, but nothing like this. And I'm wondering if you can tell me why that is. What is it? What are you doing, or what are you bringing to the table or the field of psychotherapy that makes people so excited?
It's a tough one because, I think it is a way to help people go pretty deep, pretty fast. And not only do they get a lot of information that's similar to what psychodynamic therapists are interested in, but they can actually, by interacting with these parts, rather than just like mindfulness is just kind of observing them and being accepting of them, instead getting to know them. And once you get to know them, even the ones that seem so troubling in your life and create all these symptoms, as you get to know them, you come to realize that they're all valuable and they're all trying their best and they're stuck in the past. They carry these, what I call burdens, extreme beliefs and emotions that drive them. And as you get that, you start to have a lot of compassion for parts of you that you hated seconds ago. And with that compassion, they soften and begin to transform. And so I think part of the appeal now is that there's a way to access a place inside of us that has that compassion that I call the self with a capital S. From that place, get to know the parts, which does lead to fairly rapid transformation in many people. Not always. There are people whose, what I call protector parts, take a long time before they trust it's safe enough to let anything happen in there. But short of that, a lot of times this can create a lot of transformation quickly. So that's the best I can do. And
okay, well, fair enough. Well, we're going to hear from the audience whether they agree with with that synopsis, or maybe they have more to say, more information that you don't realize you're bringing to them. And let's hear from them. But what I think I hear you saying is that by articulating the value of each parts, identifying and articulating and expressing the value of each parts, we come to, I don't know if the word is love or
love.
Accept each part for what it is. And rather than what I see people doing, all those shoulds and so much judgment, self-judgment and self-loathing that comes from, well, I should really not be feeling this. I should really be doing this. I should be able to stop doing this. Instead, we're looking to accept each part. And you're saying that it's more effective than something like mindfulness, which sort of acknowledges, it sees it, it watches it, it observes it, it acknowledges that it's there, but doesn't necessarily make that much sense of it.
Not only does it not make that much sense of it, it kind of ignores it. And so this takes another step. Mindfulness is a good first step, but this is a step of not articulating what the part is, but discovering what the part really is by getting curious and asking questions and waiting for the answers. And then once you learn, you have this natural compassion for the part that then, if I were working with you, I would have you can you show this part of you how much you feel for it now and you care about it? And can you get close to it in there? And can you actually hold it maybe? And how is it reacting to all of that? So it becomes you become a very active leader in this inner world.
So here's a question that I have. I understand that you're having the parts talk to each other to get to understand each other. Why do you find that that would be so much more effective than, let's say, in classical, psychodynamic work, where the question might be, and why do you think you do that? Rather than, and why do you think, what is your part saying that it does that?
Mm-hmm.
The externalization of the parts, or however you might conceptualize it in your terminology. Why do you find that to be more effective than the question of why do you do that, or what does that do for you?
Because by asking, what do you think about this, or why do you think this is why you behave this way, you're accessing a very cognitive part of you that's thinking about the answer and giving you an answer. And you're not dropping into the more limbic parts of you where all the emotion and these extreme beliefs are stored. And so we discovered a way to ask the thinking part of you to step back and give us a little bit of space, and then allow you to focus on some of the parts that carry what we call exile parts that you had locked away because they got hurt or ashamed or terrified, and actually start to interact with them. And that takes you limbic, that takes you into these places that you can't get to through a lot of traditional modes of therapy. And once you get there, you have a chance to actually unload a lot of these extreme beliefs and emotions these parts carry, at which point they'll transform into their naturally valuable states. So one basic premise I haven't talked about yet is that we all have parts. It's the nature of the mind to have them, and they're all valuable. There are no bad parts. It's the title of a book I just wrote. And they're forced out of their naturally valuable states into extreme roles by being frozen in time during a trauma, and by the burdens they carry, the extreme beliefs and emotions they got from those traumas. But once released from where they're stuck in the past and unloading these burdens, they'll show up as who they naturally are. So that's a very empowering, and actually turns out to be true, proposition.
So you're saying if you can access these more limbic places, then you can bring permission to the more emotional states to step up and speak for themselves, rather than coming from a more cognitive place where they're still able to somehow suppress some of the emotional components and just speak about it sort of in a more intellectual way.
Yeah, not only come forward, but also feel the embrace of this person I call the self, who is just beneath the surface of all these parts. So generally speaking, we ask parts to open space. What I call the self pops up and has all these wonderful qualities of leadership. And then from that place, have that person interact with these parts. So it isn't the parts getting to know each other so much. It would be you in this open-hearted, open-minded state, asking questions of these parts and listening to their answers, and then actually going and embracing them from that same place.
Okay, let's jump on a couple of questions, because people are raising their hands for a long time and I don't want their hands to tire out.
My question is, there is I believe it was developed by Freud, the ego state therapy. I'm trying to understand the difference between ego state and IFS. I understand that ego state has some drawbacks, that people who do ego state sometimes become even more disassociated. I'm trying to understand the difference between IFS and ego state.
Yeah, there are several models that believe, as I do, that people have these parts. One is ego state therapy. I think Gregory might have mentioned voice dialogue, and Gestalt worked with parts. So yeah, there are a number of approaches that think this way. I think one of the main differences is the systems thinking that I brought to this inner world of parts, and how rather than just focusing on one ego state at a time, I'm noticing how there are some that are protecting others, there are some that are polarized with others. Basically, I'm a family therapist, and I just brought my family therapy hat to this inner world, and it totally is parallel. So, the part that gets angry, gets too angry, becomes scapegoated in the inner world, just like it does in a family, like a kid in a family who is, because of the dynamics of the family, forced into being in the role of the angry one. It's not a bundle of anger. It's not an angry ego state. It's a good part that got forced into that protective role, and will leave that role once it trusts it's safe to do that, and once the parts it's protecting have been healed. So all of that, and in terms of your concern about further fragmenting people, in the early days as I was mucking around with all of this, I clearly was doing that. And I got scared because my clients were having pretty severe, what we now call backlash reactions to some of my sessions. And so after I got over the fear, I got curious and asked what I was doing wrong. And I was taught that I was violating the rules of these systems by going to these very vulnerable places without permission from the parts that protected them. And we've learned, so that now we don't have any of that increased fragmentation. We learned to work with protective parts first, not expecting them to change, but in order to get permission to go to the parts that they protect. And then we heal those parts, what we call exiles. And then the protectors are freed up to take on a totally different role. So all of that, I think, is how it's different from ego state therapy.
So would you say that if I use IFS, is there a concern that disassociate client will become even more disassociate?
If you used IFS, would they become more dissociated? No, it's quite the opposite. So people dissociate partly because their system is already quite fragmented, and there are parts that will take them out if they get too close to certain other parts or too close to certain emotions. And so we go to those dissociating parts, and that doesn't give them more power. We go to them to try and help them get freed from their role, their protective role, and we learn about what they're afraid would happen if they didn't dissociate. And we fix that, and now they don't have to dissociate anymore. So people become far less dissociative in that process. And this is a model where the person comes in quite fragmented, and you're rounding up all these parts that are out there, and you're bringing them back home so they feel much more integrated. So it's quite the opposite of further dissociating people.
Even in the process of therapy, like let's say, I know when you finish therapy, they're less dissociated, but if they get in touch with, like, let's say, a very angry part, and then let's say we finish therapy and it comes back next week, like, isn't there a risk that this client will be even upcoming week more disassociated?
Like I say, there are times where you'll have a backlash to a session where they might seem more dissociated. So, but if that were the case, instead of getting scared as a therapist, I'm going to go, let me find the part of you that took you out this week, and we'll talk to it about why it did that and why it was reactive to the last session. And we'll negotiate, if I made a mistake, I'm sorry, I won't do that anymore. And we negotiate permission to keep going, and then the backlash is done.
Okay, let's jump on to the next question.
Hi, Dr. Schwartz, thank you so much for joining us. Your humanity and your humility have come through so much every time I've heard you speak and seen you in various videos and things like that, and even here today, and really appreciate who you are as a person. As a religious group, we are very motivated by trying to find for ourselves and for our clients our purpose in life. And here we have IFS introducing the idea of the self. I shared recently with our email group, I found comments of Rabbi Elijah of Vilna, known in Jewish circles as the Vilna Gaon, who died in the year 1800, where he has the concept of the self, which he describes in terms of the soul, which I'm sure you have no problem with. But he has an aspect of it that I wouldn't call it cynical, but I think it's realistic. And I wanted to ask you, the idea that there's some part of us, call it the soul, call it the self, that really knows what's right for us.
Mhm.
In your interview with Bessel van der Kolk, your half-hour interview, I saw that a little foreign idea to him. You had to remind him, no, the self knows. And what the Vilna Gaon wrote about the soul was, yes, the soul will tell you your path, your spiritual path in life. But there's a caveat there. Only if you are really open to what it has to say and don't have all this other stuff with your evil inclination or what we call psychological stuff in the way. My question for you is, I look at myself, I hope I have a self in there with the capital S, but I also have all my stuff. How can the self get out there and really direct me in the right direction when all this stuff is out there? Is it really true that we can get that self to actually guide me in the right way?
Yeah, great question. So, yes, you do have a self, and it does know what's right for you. And there are lots of parts with their burdens that are in the way, as is true for me. And so, as you unburden those parts and they no longer are in their extreme roles, then they're no longer interfering. In fact, they get on board with the self's direction. And so that's there has to be a lot of work to get to that point where self can be fully in the lead and take you where you should be going. But the process of doing that work and helping all these parts heal is part of the reason we're here, from my point of view. It's part of the lessons we're here to learn.
It's not a very metaphysical concept that there's a part of you that knows somehow what your path in life should be.
Yeah, it is a metaphor. For me, self is a very spiritual concept, more than a concept. It's, for lack of a better word, it's God in us. It's can't be damaged, and like you said, it knows how to heal, and it knows the right direction for you. And so for me, it's similar to the soul, or in Buddhism, Buddha nature, or in Hinduism, Atman, or virtually every spiritual tradition has a word for it. And I stumbled onto a way to access that pretty quickly in people and then begin the process of helping these parts get on board with its project.
Okay, so we still have more questions, so let's take them.
Thank you so much. What an honor, a privilege be speaking to you, Dick Schwartz.
Oh,
Huge fan.
bummer. I thought you were talking about me.
Oh, and Melissa. Thank you, Melissa. I know that my understanding, you, Dick, are trained in psychoanalysis, and so I'm curious as to how that relationship either impacts the therapy of IFS or does it not. I just finished Frank Anderson's book, and he's of the opinion that really it's secondary, that it's really the client's relationship with their self, which is the real work of IFS, and the therapist-client relationship is just to witness, just to be present, just to a secondary person.
I didn't realize he wrote that. I disagree with that because at first, when I first discovered that people had this self in there that could become this great internal leader, I felt relief because I thought, okay, that takes the pressure off me as the therapist to provide the corrective experiences. And and I'm a guy, so I didn't like all that dependence and transference and all that. And then as I kept doing it and started doing it more and more with more and more traumatized people who had all these diagnoses that you have heard about, I came to realize that it is not that simple, that it's true, self can really do a lot of that, but the degree to which I can be in self, and we haven't talked about this yet, but I talk about the 8 C's of self-leadership. So calm, curious, confident, compassionate, creative, courageous, clear and connected. The degree to which I bring myself and my parts aren't getting in the way allows the client to feel the safety of my presence and the acceptance in my presence, and myself, like a tuning fork, starts to resonate the client's self and bring it forward more. And so my presence and my relationship with the client is quite crucial to the success. Part of why, you might have seen some of my demos, why I can go so fast in one meeting with a person is because I bring a lot of that. I bring a lot of what we call self-energy, and people immediately sense the safety of it, and their protectors relax, and then they'll go to these kinds of places. So I'm going to have a talk with Frank about that, because I don't want him minimizing that relationship. But it's quite different than traditional psychoanalytic therapies, where analyzing the transference and the corrective experiences is such a key side of the whole experience.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Right. Well, my understanding of what you're saying is that the relationship, in other words, the client's experience of the acceptance that the therapist has towards him, vis-a-vis some of those things such as curiosity and interest, and actually conveys the message to the client that he is acceptable.
That's right.
And so that relationship is vital in the healing of the self, even in psychoanalysis.
Right. And the message that all parts are welcome, that there are no bad parts, that the things you're most ashamed of can be transformed, all of that also is conveyed in my relationship, my presence.
That's what I call therapy before modality, or therapy before technique. This is
Totally.
good. That's what part of the good therapy.
Totally agree.
Okay.
This is really exciting for me. Dick, to me, you're a legend. So it's a real privilege to be able to speak to you. Thank you, Maishi, for facilitating this. But I guess what I'm hearing you say also is the degree to which the therapist is himself is the degree to which that relationship will be, strong. Or I guess when you're looking for an IFS therapist, you want to look for a therapist who is very much himself.
That's right. That's totally right. And when I'm in self, not only is there safety in my presence, but we should have a t-shirt that just says self heals, because the right words are just coming out of my mouth spontaneously without me even having to think about it. And those words actually do help people feel seen, help their exiles feel seen and cared for as well, so that I can be a collaborator to their self, who's the primary healer of their exiles, but I'm right alongside.
What I love about IFS therapy is I recently finished the course with Bonnie Weiss. And what I've learned is that as a therapist myself, I can always take a moment to get back into self. If I notice my parts getting in the way, I found that so helpful, and I guess it took away a lot of anxiety in terms of trying to be the best therapist, but it's okay if parts come up. There's a way to acknowledge them and to, get back into self so that you could really be there where the client needs it to be.
Exactly. Yeah, it's very practical that way, in the sense that it's not happening to me now, but if I noticed that there was an anxious part coming up because somebody asked a really personal or a challenging question, internally, if you had a mic in my head, you'd hear me say some version of, "It's okay, just trust me, let me stay. You don't have to jump in right now. I'll talk to you after the hour's over, but just let me stay." And then I will immediately notice that anxiety just kind of relax and step out, and my heart's open again. Yeah.
How much do you find that the work of therapy is really on the therapist in that way?
So much. When I do
right?
supervision now, it's very rare that I'm giving actual advice about what to do with a client. Mostly I'm saying, what's this client bringing up in you? Okay, let's find that part, and let's get to know why it's getting so triggered and getting in your way.
But very often the clients come in and they have a lot of blockages to their self. You mentioned that you're able to get to the self of the client quickly, or like pretty fast. So I'm wondering if you can give some tips on how to do that.
Yeah, so just to give you a little more concrete idea of the process, if I were working with you, Sippy, and let's say you wanted to work with your critic that it was on your back all the time, I would say, okay, focus on it and find it in your body or around your body where it seems to be broadcasting from. Most everybody can do that pretty readily. You might say it's over here in my head or just above my head. And then I would ask this sort of magic question: how do you feel toward that critic, that part of you? And in answering that question, you're telling me how much of yourself is present. So if you hate it, that's not one of those C words, that's not self. So let's get the one who hates it to give us a little space to get to know it better. Or if you're afraid of it, that's not self, so let's get that scared one to. So I would have you ask those parts to open space a little bit. And if they did, then I would ask you, now how do you feel toward it? Spontaneously, you would say some version of, I'm just curious about why it calls me names. Seconds earlier, you hated it, you were afraid of it. Now you have some degree of self because you're curious, you're calm, and you have some confidence, whereas before you were scared of it. That's how we ask it. It's that simple. Just getting parts to open space, and this other person who's the same in everybody pops out and then knows how to relate to these parts in a healing way. Does that help?
Yeah, so it's sort of like not being afraid of it or making it an exile, but bringing it in and giving it that space.
Yeah, but it's also getting these parts that are polarized with the target part to relax and step back, access itself immediately, just spontaneously. It's that simple.
I have clients that cannot relate to any of this. I am EMDR trained. Like when I try and do things that they think is out there, or like when I say what, if I say what, different parts of yourself, they just look at me like I have three heads.
Yeah.
And they just keep focusing on like they're telling their everyday story, but I can't even get to their deeper level. I know it's a defense mechanism, but I was wondering if you had any specific techniques, or if a client looks at you and say, what do you mean my other part? Or like, what do you mean I feel about it? They don't have any concept. They can't even go there.
Yeah. Yeah, there are such people, and generally you're right. It is a defense. There are parts that just don't want to focus inside, and they'll use the language as their battleground. Now, some people, if you just change the word a little bit, they don't like the word part, but if you say this aspect of you, or that they don't have a problem with. So that's worth a try. But more often, I find that initially, like if I tried to use the language in the first one or two sessions, I get that kind of pushback. But if I give up on that for a while and I just relate as I did before IFS, and create a trusting relationship with the client, then maybe after session 5 or 6, I ask about their parts, and then they're happy to start talking about them. It was more, there wasn't enough trust in the room to actually think about that at that point. So, and then there are some clients who just won't do it, and you just kind of do other things, like EMDR.
I have clients that won't do EMDR. They think it's so weird.
Yeah.
So Dr. Schwartz, Dick, question for you. We have a participant in the group who's agreeable to doing a role play.
Great.
We have a couple of questions as well, but I think we'll take a break from the questions for a few minutes. Has a fear of heights, and she wants to know if you would demonstrate on her how you might conduct a IFS session. First, say hi and introduce yourself.
Hi, I took the training already a while ago.
Right.
I actually had a few questions today, but okay, I'd rather do the demo.
Okay, sounds good. I actually have a fear of heights myself, so. All right, so you ready?
Yeah.
So focus on that fear and find it in your body or around your body.
Yeah.
Where do you find it?
I feel it and my upper body, literally my chest and hands and fingers, the whole upper body,
Okay,
my jaw.
great. And as you notice it in those places, how do you feel toward it?
I'm afraid of it. I'm getting an image of a little kid that I know that's on a porch safely on the 8th floor. But I shriek and I just go away. I just can't handle it. It's too much for me.
Okay. So it's the little kid who's the one who's scared of heights?
No, it's me that's scared of heights, and I'm scared for the kid that
Okay.
something might happen for the kid because that kid is up high.
Up high, right. Okay. All right. So let's focus on the fear again. And
Okay.
it's still in the same place in your chest and
Yeah.
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 And you said you're afraid of it. So let's see if the parts of you that are afraid of the fear could give us a little space so we can just get to know it better. See if that's possible.
It feels like one. I can't separate being afraid of the fear.
Okay, so in other words, that part who's afraid of the fear won't step back, won't relax.
Right.
So focus on it now and find it in your body or around your body.
Yeah, same thing. Same thing.
Same places?
Yeah. Maybe a little less, not so pronounced, not so.
And ask that one what it's afraid would happen if it lets you get to know the fear of heights.
Just a moment. Marty de Thier, please.
I'll repeat that. Ask this one what it's afraid would happen if it didn't make you afraid of the fear. You know what I'm asking?
Yeah, then I would be in danger, or the kid might be in danger.
Okay. So this part thinks you need that fear to protect that kid. Is that right?
Right. Right. If I would naturally do what I want to do, I would go and grab that kid inside so nothing happens.
I see. Okay. So would these parts be interested in letting us do that? Trying to help that kid?
Yes, they want to help the kid, help
Okay.
the kid stay safe.
Yeah. All right.
And as I'm going through this, I feel an intense sweat, like my entire upper body is extremely sweaty.
Is that okay or is it too much?
It feels too much, but my mind knows that I'm safe and everybody else is safe.
Yeah, so just tell these parts that it's okay and ask them to let us help that kid. Ask them to just relax and let you and me go and get that kid. See if they're willing to do that.
Okay. They're like very hesitant. They're here. They understand that this is for the benefit.
Good. Yeah, all we ask is a little space, and we'll talk to them afterwards.
But in the meantime, something might happen.
That's what they're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, just let them know I can keep you covered. It's all going to be okay.
Okay. I'm trying very hard. Let's see where this takes us.
Totally. Let's just give it a shot. So focus on the kid again.
Okay.
And is it a girl or a boy?
A girl.
And how do you feel toward her as you see her up there?
I know she's okay. I know she's safe. I still would love to grab her, but I feel like my hands are tied, and she's really safe. I'm telling it to myself. I know she's safe.
Mm-hmm. And who is it that's tying your hands?
Okay, they're not tied anymore.
Okay, good. So how do you feel toward her now?
Okay. I'm fine, just watching. Not happy, not sad for her, nothing. No, I'm not afraid, but
Do you
just
feel
watching her.
do you feel caring for her?
Absolutely.
Okay. So how would it feel to get closer to her in there?
I don't want to go close.
You do or you don't?
No,
And what's the
I,
fear?
I feel like I'm putting myself into danger.
By getting close to her?
Yeah. I
And
know
what-
she's safe and I'm not worried for her, but I wouldn't go there either.
And what's the fear if you were to get closer? What's the danger? What are the parts saying about the danger?
Okay, when I try to do this, I start feeling my feet. As I try to use my feet to go closer, I feel my whole legs are becoming numb and difficult to use.
Okay. So again, that's a protective part. And just ask it what it's afraid would happen if it let you get closer.
The floor might open under me.
Okay.
I know it's not true, but
I know, but it's what the parts believe.
yeah.
So just let it know that we can keep that from happening. And see if it'll release its grip also.
Okay.
So how would it feel now to get closer to that girl?
Okay, so now I'm able to go through the room in front of the porch
Right.
to the porch, but I wouldn't step out onto the
Okay.
porch.
And she's on the porch?
And she's on the porch.
Okay, but from that proximity, can you just let her know that you're there and you care about her? And just see how she reacts.
She's fine. She's not afraid. She knows she's safe.
Okay.
And she doesn't feel anything's wrong. Like, why are you saying this to me?
Okay.
I'm safe.
She's confused, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And what are they afraid now if they let you on the porch? What are they afraid would happen?
I mean, the legs,
Yeah, whoever is keeping you from going on
Yeah.
the porch. Just ask.
Okay. So I'll take the risk because in my mind, I know it's safe.
Good. Yeah, so go ahead and
But I'm still hesitant. Like,
it's okay.
okay. So I'm with one foot on the porch and one foot inside the door.
Okay, good. All right. And how are you feeling?
Trying to get used to it.
Okay. And the girl still doesn't know what this is about. She's fine.
Like, why are you doing this? This is so weird that you're doing this funny thing.
All right. Maybe just see if there's anything she wants you to know right now.
She's too young to ask, but I can see on her face that her inquisitive look is like what I said, like, why are you doing this?
Okay.
So do I need to respond to her or just let her be?
Whatever feels right, just tell her that you care somehow, whatever you want to say.
Okay. So it feels like I want to say, I'm here with you. I want to enjoy this along with you.
Great. How does she react?
She's calm. She calms down. I was like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. I don't know why, but still.
Right.
I'll take it for what it is.
Okay. Okay. And what feels right now in terms of what would help your system now that you're there on the porch with her?
Okay, to just stand there and get a sense of what it is like and whatever it takes, because my body feels safe.
Mm-hmm.
My upper body and my legs.
Yeah.
I know I'm very high up.
Yeah.
I try not to look down because that triggers
That's fine.
discomfort.
Yeah, but just let all these parts who were so scared to let you do this, let them see that you're okay and that she's okay. And just see how they react.
They're like, wow, what did you do? Why did you do that against my will? I told you not to.
Okay, so that they are upset that you did it, or are
They're
they
not upset, they're surprised.
surprised? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And is there anything you want to say to them now?
I knew I can do it.
Yeah. And how do they react?
They're like stunned, no words.
Yeah. Okay. And see if they need anything else from you or if she needs anything.
The girl, the little girl was fine all along.
Right.
I was actually curious, like, why am I behaving in such a weird way? She doesn't know me for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe ask these protectors, now that you've shown that you're okay and she's okay, ask them where they got the belief that she was in such danger and jeopardy.
I know where they got this belief.
Ask, ask them anyway and let them tell you.
Okay. Yeah, and that's what they're saying. If you want me to say it here.
Only if you're okay saying it, you know, if it's.
I'm okay, but I don't, there are a lot of, it might trigger people.
Oh. Well,
So.
you just gave them a trigger alert, so.
Okay. So when I was a very young child, like able to stand up already, my crib was next to a window. And I was a curious little kid, and the window was open, nice weather. And I was curious to see what's outside the window. Okay. So I bent over and wanted to see even further around, and I didn't know how dangerous that was. So I almost went flying. I was outside the window, but the diaper pin was hooked onto the gate.
Wow.
Okay. So my mother heard me crying from the other room, and she came running, didn't find me in the crib, and grabbed me inside. But the fear of heights was still there.
Yeah, okay. So let them know you understand that. And maybe they generalize that to this girl on the porch.
Is it important that I tell this girl on the porch? Maybe just in a session. I don't want her to really know that.
Okay.
Very
No,
young kid.
yeah, you don't have to tell the girl. But let the protectors know you understand. They come by that fear honestly.
Okay. So these are protectors that, and I'm thankful to them that they've kept me, like, experience is the best teacher, and the body keeps the score. So this is a combination of both.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful towards them that they kept me from doing this again, although I would have known not to do that once I'm a little older.
Yeah. And maybe ask them how old they think you are. And don't think, just wait for the answer.
I don't get it. I'm not getting an answer. And also, this is a story that is pre-verbal. I don't remember it. I just heard it from
I understand.
my parents.
Yeah. Okay. Ask them, though, now that they see that you're okay and she's okay, if they're interested in unloading any of this fear of heights.
Yes.
And ask them where they carry it in their bodies or on their bodies.
It's all over, like on the skin, like outside themselves.
Okay. Ask what they'd like to give it up to. Light, water, fire, wind, earth, anything else.
They'll throw it into the fire.
All right. So set up a fire for them and tell them to just throw it all into the fire. They don't, no need to carry any of that anymore.
Yeah, okay.
How are they doing now without it?
They're very happy. They're actually excited.
Good, good. And tell them now, if they want to, they can invite qualities into their body that they'd like to have, and you can just see what comes into them now.
They want to invite qualities, but they would. It's too deep of a question for a quick answer. We really have to think about it.
That's fine. They can take their time with that. So, how's it feeling in there now?
It's a very good suggestion. And also, I usually take my time to think about things, so
That's
I don't
fine.
get an answer so quickly. It'll come with time.
Yeah, I just mean generally, how are things feeling inside of you now?
Okay.
Feeling
Good.
okay?
Yeah.
Good. So thank your parts for letting us do all this. I know it was a big stretch to trust.
Yeah. It was.
Yeah. And when you're ready, you can shift your focus back outside.
Okay.
Welcome back. So many thanks to you. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank
Wow.
you. This is something I've been struggling with all my life. And I'm not a youngster, so.
Well, thank you for agreeing to do this. And I found it to be so touching. And of course, we're not going to let you get away without following up. Okay, let's jump into the next question.
Okay. Yeah, Dr. Schwartz, thank you so much. At least in terms of the exercise, I guess I think she would have different. And then at the very end, I would even ask her to become the pin, because the pin saved her life. You know, that I thought that would have been interesting. And I appreciate, you know, you have a very Carl Rogers way about you, that you're very accepting, and I think that's an extremely important part of the therapy. I think that I wrote a book on paradox psychology, so part of my interest is also in you know, you said some training with Minuchin and Satir. Do you use any paradoxical interventions? Do you use humor in some of your interventions? I'd be interested in knowing that.
You know, when I was a family therapist, I was also into paradoxical interventions and would use them with families. And but I don't so much anymore with this inner world. But I do use humor a lot. I mentioned the 8 C's, which are qualities of self, but then we have, because I like alliteration, we have the 5 P's, which are qualities of the therapist also. Mm-hmm. And so we have presence and persistence and perspective and patience, and then playfulness. So I'm very lighthearted.
I thought you were going to say funny, like PH, maybe you spell it.
I'll add that one. So, but humor is kind of lighthearted playfulness is a big part of it, a lot of the time. Because people often are so scared, or, you know, you could see I was just very optimistic, and we can do this, we can do that, very calm. All of that presence in me is very reassuring to these protectors. So when I enter a system like that, I'm thinking, you know, it's like in high school we read Lord of the Flies. It's like a bunch of kids who were stranded, and some of them had to become the big warriors, and others, but they're just waiting for some grown-up to come along and say, we've got this, just let us do it.
So what percentage would you say is the therapeutic alliance and trust in terms of the whole of therapy? Like, you know, was it 50%? Is it 75%? What percent would you give that alliance in terms of successful treatment?
You know, it's one of those necessary but not sufficient answers. So percentage, it's huge, because if you don't have that presence, the client's not going to let you do that much. The protectors are going to be interfering all the time. So it's necessary, but it's also then important to access the client's self and have them begin to do a lot of the healing inside. So to do that isn't necessarily the therapist's presence. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question in terms of numbers, but.
Okay, let's take another question.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you, Maishi, for arranging this. And thank you so much, Dr. Schwartz. Your work has really changed my own life, and I'm so grateful to be, learning how to do this work now with my clients. So the question I have is something I've had with several clients. I'm going to use singular language now just to make it easier for me to ask the question, but it's really a general question. So I have a client who switches parts very acutely in session. I've screened her for DID. She does not present with pretty much most of the symptoms of DID in general life. But when we do parts work, she switches very acutely, in the sense that I can notice her whole body language shift, her whole presentation switch. And when she switches, it'll usually be multiple times within a few minutes. I can't get her to access the part that we were just talking to. Mm-hmm. So right now she's fairly new to parts work. So right now, kind of what I've been doing is letting her see that all the parts are okay. So not if she can't access that part anymore, we go to talk to the new part that came up. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if there's a more organized way of dealing with this.
Clients like her, their system often is sort of testing you out in the beginning. And they're going to see how much you're going to try to, force them into some organization, or if you're going to kind of go with them for a while. And the more you can kind of go with it and form, a lot of the time with those clients, we're doing what we call direct access, which is more like what Elliot was talking about with Gestalt, where I'd be talking directly to one part, and then I'd say, oh, and I see there's another part here. Okay, and then let me talk directly to it, rather than, because there isn't much self to be found in the beginning. So I'm forming these relationships directly with these parts, getting their trust, and then once that's in place, I'll start to get more organized. And I'll say, okay, I see this one's jumped in, but I'm going to ask it to just wait its turn, and let me just stay here. And if not, then why not? I did a version of that where we started with the fear, and then there was the fear of the fear, and the fear of the fear wouldn't step back. So then that part became the target part for a while. And so you kind of go back and forth until there's enough trust and enough of the key parts have a relationship with you that they start to trust it's safe to let the self show up.
Does it make sense that it can take weeks or even months of very chaotic parts work until you start to organize?
I've had clients where it took months and years sometimes.
Okay.
That's where that P word patience comes in.
Yeah, I actually noticed recently that in one session where I tried rushing a part, and then I was like, it took till after the session for me to realize that was my own impatient parts wanting to do good work. Yeah, I think I have to do that work myself.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, we're closing in at 10:15. I want to take one more question. Just one last shout out to Aaron Herzog, who's been so instrumental in finding, locating, and tracking down some of the wonderful presenters that we have, including Dick Schwartz. Let's take one last question, and then I think we'll call it a night and maybe announce some of the next programs that are coming on after the holidays.
Yes, Dr. Schwartz, you mentioned that you do give supervision. Wondering how we could somehow access that?
I don't actually anymore. I'm just overwhelmed with all the other things we're doing. But there are a lot of good therapists that are doing supervision. If you go to our website, which is ifs-institute.com, there's a directory, and in it, I think there's a list of people that do supervision as well.
Thank you very much. If you had a few moments, Dr. Schwartz, to share with everybody that story that I've heard you say about yourself when you almost drowned and how you were able to somehow get in touch with your own self at that moment in your life, I think everyone would find that so inspiring.
I'd be happy to, but I think we might be out of time. Is that?
Well, it's your call.
I'm happy to, yeah. So this is a couple of years ago. I was visiting my brother and his wife in Hawaii, and they live right on the beach. So I was down on the beach, and it was a very wavy, stormy day, but I thought it'd be safe to just walk around in the shallows. And I took a step, and then all of a sudden I'm being pulled out to sea in a riptide. And not being from the ocean, I didn't know that you're supposed to swim horizontally. And I was trying to swim back in unsuccessfully. I just kept being pulled out further and further. And I'd try to roll over on my back to catch my breath, and the waves were so big they'd come and fill my mouth up. So it reached a point where I really thought I was going to die, and my parts are screaming, we're going to die. And I had the presence of mind to just say, okay, I get that, we might die, but I'll be with you if we do. And it really helped them calm down. And then sort of at the last moment, my sister-in-law came down to the beach and frantically pointed for me to swim horizontally, which didn't make sense because I would be swimming toward these big waves, but I did, and then just had enough energy and the waves carried me in. And but it was a big lesson. One of the big goals of IFS is for the parts to come to trust this self as a leader. And there are those kinds of opportunities where if you can stay in self in the face of that kind of danger, you get a lot of credibility from your parts. So thanks for asking me to tell that story.
Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you for
That's
sharing.
beautiful. And it was a divine intervention that brought you back so we can all continue to glean.
I'd like to think that.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, well, that was so touching, and we really appreciate both the story and the presentation and your willingness to entertain all the questions. We hardly even had a chance to talk about blended parts and some of the other terms that you threw in that I jotted down. But I feel like this was a very enriching and inspiring night for all of us. We had 100 participants, which was our limit. And we still have over 90 on. So that just goes to show how you carried the crowd through.
Right.
And so I really appreciate that you did this. I'm really humbled and honored that you agreed to do this show.
Well, thank you. It was delightful for me, and I so appreciate all the appreciation. It's there were many, many barren years, so I try to take all this in now.
Well, as you're speaking, there's calls for part 2. So we'll
be happy to
stay
do it.
tuned. To be continued. Thank you, and good night, everybody.
The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard is edited and engineered by Chelsea Weaver. If you're looking to start a podcast or ready to take the editing off of your plate, be sure to visit chelseaweaverpodcasting.com. Well, that wraps up another episode of The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard. I know there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and I'm thankful you've chosen to listen to mine.
Be sure to visit lisamustard.com to access the show notes and discover more fantastic content.
And I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the show. Thank you.